Good morning and welcome to the Milwaukee Business Journal Bridging Barriers webinar presented by United Way and Manpower Group. I'm Kira LaFond. I'm the market president and publisher of the Milwaukee Business Journal, and we'll be leading you today on a fabulous discussion about the ways that we can make our community a much better place to be. I've got a little background for you. In 2018, the U.S. Census Bureau shared this simple fact. Black unemployment rate in Wisconsin was 3 times more than white unemployment rate. We certainly know these numbers will only increase as we learn more about the COVID-19 pandemic. United Way's Diversity Leadership Society began to tackle the barriers that prevented so many from finding a good job. For those of you who don't know, United Way's Diversity Leadership Society is a group of individuals that are working to ensure every family in our community has the opportunity to flourish, no matter their gender, their age, their ethnicity, or their geography. For the past several years, their signature initiative has been reducing barriers to employment and advancement. And one of the co-chairs of the Diversity Leadership Society is Jasmine Johnson, the Diversity Programs Director at Manpower Group. She's our moderator for today's webinar and a good friend. Hi, Jasmine.
Good morning, Kira. It's such an honor to be with you today.
We are so excited to talk with you about this initiative and also to bring on board an amazing panel to talk about the work that's being done. We also want to talk about it from our business perspective. Obviously, we're the Business Journal, and the things that we write about really focus on how does this affect people's businesses. So before we get to our panelists, we're going to discuss a bit of background. Let's talk about this initiative and how it got started. Jasmine, can you kick us off?
Absolutely. And thanks again so much for having me, Kara. I am so excited to be here representing one of the 3 co-chairs for the United Way of Greater Milwaukee, Waukesha counties, reducing barriers to employment and advancement. I serve alongside a host of amazing leaders across the community that make up the Diversity Leadership Society Council. I am also co-chairs with Grady Crosby of Johnson Controls and Divina Wright-Contrell from GMR Marketing. You already talked about the unemployment rate being 3 times higher for Wisconsinites for Black unemployment as it pertains to that rate. Just to give a little bit of background on the reducing barriers to employment and advancement, I'm not a believer of coincidence, and it's always important to be prepared for things that you don't even know what's coming ahead. So for example, through the leadership of the previous president and CEO of the United Way of Greater Milwaukee and Waukesha County, Mary Lou Young, and the board chair at the time, Corey Nettles, tapped me over 5 years ago to be able to bring and build out an opportunity to diversify the donor base and engage others that had not necessarily been familiar with the work of the United Way specifically, understanding that they were partner agencies of the United Way and how those connection points made, but also begin to build out an opportunity to look at this particular aspect. Women United had their arms around health. The young emerging leaders had their arms wrapped around education. So you had the financial stability pillar that was kind of just left in the balance, and being able to look at the intentionality and the strategy behind looking at that pillar and how, from a diversity leadership society, it felt right. So over 5 years ago, being able to do the pilot and then do another course throughout the campaign and grow and really fully build out the leadership council for the Diversity Leadership Society has brought us to this moment in time. Over 5 years ago, I was not employed by a leading company here in Milwaukee whose mission is to put people to work every single day. So over 5 years ago, being tapped to build out this pilot and this program and initiative, fast forward to working as a leader at Manpower Group, as I mentioned, whose mission is to put people to work every single day. And then looking at who would have predicted 2020. So when I look at, for such a time as this, having an initiative and having the business community galvanize right now in this moment. And so what we've looked at, because this takes a multifaceted approach to focus on the unemployment rate for Black individuals across the state, and particularly here in our region, We looked at 4 pillars because we felt it was important to be able to approach it simultaneously from multiple angles that are impacting these barriers to address them. First and foremost, it's through education, training, and credentials by supporting programs that help adults obtain their GED, learn a new skill or trade. We talk a lot at Manpower Group about upskilling, and that's, important for people in the corporate environment and those not. We all need to be specifically looking at how to continue to brush up on our skills. The second pillar is transportation, supporting programs that provide innovative transportation solutions and or assist individuals with recovery of their driver's license. Right. Third, involvement in the justice system, advocating for policy changes that assist individuals who are involved in the criminal justice system with a focusing on strengthening the ability and the options of opportunity for re-entry into the workplace. Fourth, definitely important and not least, is diverse talent retention. We've always talked about over the last 10 plus years about the brain drain, and now, being back home and leading professionally here as a Milwaukee native, understanding, the plight that does come, not just with recruiting diverse talent to the region, but also retaining that talent by collaborating and advancing equitable research and evaluation to retain diverse talents in Wisconsin and across the region. So I know we have panelists here with us this morning that will do a deeper dive into each of those pillars, but thank you for the opportunity to, again, just begin by providing the overarching aspect of the Reducing Barriers to Employment and Advancement initiative.
Thank you so much, and it is important to keep those 4 pillars in mind as we have this discussion, because they really wrap around the entire issue. And I know we're going to discuss this in more details later in the webinar, but let's put it out there right now. Jasmine, why is building an equitable workforce good for business?
Building an equitable workforce is good for business because it helps boost the economy in every single pocket and crevice across the region. When we look at some national statistics and references, specifically in a McKinsey study back in 2019, that was just last year, it seems like forever ago, the analysis found that companies in the top quartile for gender diversity on their executive teams were 25% more likely to have above average profitability than companies in the 4th quartile. When we talk about, looking at an article that was published in Forbes magazine, it talks about that when employees think that their organization is committed to and supportive of diversity, they feel included. And, a lot of conversation has been talked about even moving the I before D in equity, because, I think there's been a great amount of work, positive work, that's been done to make for sure that there was reflection and diversity by, having different representation at the table. But to me, that is for naught if there's not an opportunity for a sense of inclusion and feeling a part and that you belong. We know that from the World Economic Forum, there is a substantial amount of research that shows that diversity brings many advantages to an organization, beyond just increased profitability and creativity. Stronger governance and better problem-solving abilities when you have a diverse perspective from diverse lens at the table. Recently, 34 firms across the country, including the likes of Apple, Facebook, GM, 34 firms have committed to share their private and diversity data in an effort to be more transparent. And when we know we have a diverse atmosphere inside a company, it's good for business because the engagement is there. When individuals feel the sense of belonging and inclusion, there has to be a sense of being reflective. Where do I see myself within an organization? Representation definitely matters, and that's why it's also good for business. Beyond just swiping my badge, coming into a building at security, or being served in the cafeteria when we all were in our corporate spaces, is that the only time that I am really seeing and interacting with individuals that look like me? Everyone wants to see themselves and a reflection of them.
Absolutely.
Why it's good for business, Kira.
Those are all so important. Everybody who's listening today, a big part of today's webinar is getting questions and comments from the audience. We don't want this to just be us and the panel speaking to you. We want to hear from you. So please put your questions in throughout the program. In your chat boxes, you can see a chat box. You can also see a question box. Go ahead and put them in. During the panel discussion, I'm going to be monitoring those and be sharing those with Jasmine so we can ask them to our panelists throughout the conversation. I am going to go off screen, turn this over to Jasmine. She's going to moderate and introduce you to this amazing panel who is going to be sharing with you the ways that they're doing this fabulous work in Milwaukee. Jasmine, take it away.
Thank you so much, Kara. As she mentioned, we are joined with some of Milwaukee's finest. There's so much good work that's already being done. The efforts of our initiative throughout the United Way is really to highlight the amazing work that potentially is being done while amazing in silos, and ensuring we're strengthening and providing additional resources and working collectively to bring the impact to our community. So as Kara mentioned, I am joined by a host of amazing leaders within our community, and I have the opportunity at this moment to introduce them and bring them on screen to continue our conversation and dialogue. First and foremost, we have Tony White, who serves as the Director of Program Services at Employ Milwaukee. We have David Steele, the Executive Director of Regional Transit Leadership Council. The good judge, Derek Mosley, our municipal court judge for the Milwaukee Municipal Court. And we also have Tim Sheehy, President of the Metropolitan Milwaukee Association of Commerce. And before we start with our panelists, I want to bring on two key partners that I like to call my partners in good, specifically around this initiative, both from the United Way. Shannon Reed, Director of Innovative Strategies for Boys and Men of Color, as well as Samantha Mitchell, the Engagement Manager for Diversity and Inclusion Initiatives at our United Way of Greater Milwaukee and Waukesha County. Good morning, everyone. So Shannon and Sam, before we get into the conversation with our other panelists, I was hoping that we can just take a few moments and talk about a few things. First and foremost, providing a good overview of the role and responsibility that each of you serve within the organization at the United Way, and how do you choose and will support and why. So because Shannon is a confident gentleman, we are going to start ladies first. With Samantha. So Samantha, let's talk about your role as well as with the agency partners.
So my role here with United Way, I lead our diversity and inclusion initiatives. The Diversity Leadership Society falls under that umbrella, as well as our Project Lead program and Partnership Milwaukee. Shannon and I work very closely together when it comes to selection of our agency partners and working with these individuals that you'll hear from today. And I'll turn it over to Shannon so that he can go into a little bit more about the agency work and how that process transpires.
Thank you, Sam and Jasmine. Thank you so much for leading this work. We couldn't do this work without you and all the partners that are a part of this project. And so as Sam alluded to, one of the things that we know is so important is that it's because of our partners, right? When we think about the partners that are doing this work, we are not the expert, right? And so we have to make sure that we reach out to the experts who can help us bridge the specific things that we are doing in our community. So last August, we created an RBA advisory committee subject matter experts and stakeholders who are helping us steer this work. With their help, we were able to identify community organizations already leading programmatic work around barriers to employment and advancement. And as we looked at who our partners were, United Way goes through an extensive RFP process for every agency. And our advisory committee played a key role in the selection process that ultimately resulted in awarding 3 new agencies, including some of our partners once again who are on with us today: Employ Milwaukee, Regional Transit Leadership Council, and Metro Go, who you will all hear from today. And once again, Milwaukee Jobs Work. And so once again, when we think about our partners in our agency in this work, we can't do this alone. It takes everyone committed to do this work, and we're excited to see where this will go.
Thank you for that. And so while you have the floor, I'm going to ask you from the lens of strategies for boys and men of color, what is the main focus for you this year? And I'm going to ask you to speak about that in two parts, before March, and if that changed post-March to today, and then looking on, focusing on the future. And then Sam, I'll turn to you for the same question.
So Jasmine, you know, one of the things that we have had conversations about, specifically around boys and men of color, we know that there was a pandemic before an actual pandemic. When we think about systemic racial equity, things that are happening in our community, our Black and brown boys were not at the table. You know, one of the things I think about all the time is how do we ensure, I think you said something earlier that's really important. How do we make sure that our Black and brown boys are able to be seen by other leaders who look like them? And the one thing that is very important to me is to make sure that they see Judge Derek Mosley and myself in any genre of things that are happening. And so one of the things that I am trying to do in my work specifically is create opportunities, access, and resources from wherever that may be for them. One of the other things that I always talk about is that we're always talking to our youth from a perspective of what they need to do. And what we need to do is ask them what they want, not what we want to give them. And so those are things that we are trying to think about critically for our Black and brown boys. And that is something, you know, that even if we're thinking about the pandemic as a whole, we're not going to come out of this the same. And we have to prepare them for different.
Thank you so much for that. And that is so true. So Sam, from your lens and serving from a diversity and inclusion initiative and supporting the work of the Diversity Leadership Society, what is the main focus for you this year and what are you excited for future forward?
Thank you, Jasmine. So our main focus first is to continue funding programs, continue fundraising and funding programs like the ones that you all will hear from today, but also educating the community on employment disparities and institutional inequities. The Diversity Leadership Society does such an awesome job with advocating and getting the word out and bringing awareness to the issues that matters most to our community. DLS, which is Diversity Leadership Society, is also charged with ensuring everyone is treated equitably by removing barriers to accessing resources, obtaining employment opportunities with livable wages, and ensuring individuals have fair opportunities for advancement. This includes, but by no means is limited to, quality education, jobs, housing, equal treatment in the criminal justice system, and as we think about long-term, even asset building. And to piggyback off of one of your initial thoughts earlier, we'll be taking a deeper dive into the fourth pillar, which is diverse talent retention. Gearing up, I don't think we stress enough that how important it is to retain a diverse talent pool in Milwaukee and how essential that is to building a strong workforce and combating community issues involving race and social and economic barriers.
You know, that is so true. And I would say, you know, with me being out of the market professionally for almost 5 years, and you really don't know, being a Milwaukee native, what you have or what that's surrounding until you're taken out of it. And the last 20 months has been very difficult, you know, with coming back to Milwaukee after, you know, my daily, weekly life was between Chicago and New York every week for 5 years. And, you know, that sense of belonging, when you step outside that building and you see other people who actually look like you and those that don't, they expect you to be there. And then just even interacting and navigating through the city. And I think that that is some of the challenges, you know, with recruiting diverse talent and not only retaining diverse talent here in this region, just from a simple fact of, you know, look, we continue to be reminded every day that we are the first in all of the worst. And, you know, I do think that this is a very critical time. And to your point, Shannon, when you mentioned like there is no going back to what was, and I think that is so profound in so many different ways. And, you know, while having individuals for diversity thought to come into the market to recruit them here, I think there still could be some benefit to putting some effort into retaining talent that are homegrown. You know, I remember having the conversation with some of my peers during the Sherman Park uprising several years ago, where they had no clue of what Sherman Park once was. But because I was a Milwaukee native, you know, grew up at 2750 North 46th Street, I could talk about the professor 2 doors down who read poetry from his porch every single evening on the summer and talk about the rich legacy of Grant Boulevard and things of that nature. And people who weren't from here had no idea. So being able to just take a great mix of, you know, all of that definitely does contribute to what diversity of thoughts and diversity of perspective includes. And Sam, as you mentioned, I wanted to just, as we segue into why today is important and what we're looking to achieve, just reinforcing the overall vision statement for this particular initiative through the Diversity Leadership Society, because I know so much thought and passion went into crafting this and what we want to see. And what we want to see by reducing barriers to employment and advancement is that everyone deserves permanent employment with a livable wage at a workplace where they are treated with dignity and have opportunities for advancement. And so when we look at, you know, our goal for today being to inform and educate, what will make this initiative successful is the financial support of our community. Can each of you just spend just a few moments and talk about what happens when people support this initiative? And if you want to jump off with the Commitment of Manpower Group, I'll let you start there as well.
Thank you, Jasmine. There's really no limit on how and where your dollars can make an impact through this work. I have to thank Manpower Group as the official Reducing Barriers to Employment matching gift sponsor of up to $250,000. Manpower Group has been such a great partner in this work, and specifically with our men's and women's job seminars. So your contributions to the Reducing Barriers to Employment and Advancement initiative allows us to provide financial support to local agencies working to reduce barriers to employment in our community. We all know that access to a job with a livable wage is key, which allows a family to have a safe and stable home, to put food on the table, and to create an environment that is healthy and protective. And I can't end without sharing our appreciation of the individual and corporate donations we received to date through our community campaign. And just to mention a few others, Johnson Controls, as the sponsor of our Diversity Business Match, which is a 3-to-1 match for any female and minority-led businesses, up to $5,000 per company, totaling $100,000. That will also be directed to our Reducing Barriers to Employment and Advancement initiative. And to name a couple others, a huge thank you to Baird and Advocate Aurora Health for your generous donations as well.
Thank you so much for that. And again, as all of us are either in or entering our corporate campaigns, please do consider that drop-down box by supporting the Reducing Barriers to Employment and Initiative. Sam, Shannon, thank you so much for your time today. And I believe our next aspect of our time together is to hear specifically for that deeper dive from our panelists. So as I mentioned, the 4 pillars: education, training, and credentials, transportation, involvement in the criminal justice system, as well as retention of diverse talent. It is now time to take that deeper dive. And first up is that first pillar: education, training, and credentials. So Tony White, the Director and Program Services for Employ Milwaukee, good morning to you. I think are you still on mute, Tony? I can't hear you.
Okay.
There we
Good
go.
morning.
Yes.
Sorry.
Good morning.
Good morning. How are you doing this morning, Miss Samantha? Miss Jasmine.
I am outstanding because I get to start Wednesday off with each and every one of you. So I'm excited to
Thank
have this
you.
conversation and take a deeper dive. So thank you so much for being here with us this morning. Can you please give us a quick overview of your work at Employ Milwaukee?
Um, Employ Milwaukee is the local workforce development board here in Milwaukee County. We are one of 11 workforce development boards in the state of Wisconsin. My job as the director of programs is to be part of the collaborating, the convening, the coordinating of community partners around what is happening in the workforce space. To take that information along with the information that is supplied through a lot of the research that you mentioned earlier. So we are responsible to help people understand the labor market supply and demand. So it is around labor market exchange, helping to the individuals who are unemployed, underemployed, to gain access to opportunity, education, training, credentials to get them engaged with the workforce. In addition to that, we want to make sure that people have the skills necessary to be successful in the workforce. So we want to get the information from the employers in the job market. We want to also understand who is the population that need to be served, and then developing programs around how do we be innovative and creative in addressing the barriers, but also making sure that individuals have the skills and qualifications necessary to even be considered a candidate in the space when they're looking for gainful employment. The whole goal is to get to the place of self-sufficiency. So I am always looking for funding opportunities that we can leverage, that we can capitalize, helping people identify a career pathway. Everybody is not able to support themselves through your traditional methods of going to college, um, or may not have, the might be a first generation college student and just don't know how to navigate, don't have the role models. So our job is to help people navigate the job search process and the job search journey, understanding what resources are available in this community. And then how do we then after that support them? It's easy to say the access, but it's about the retention as well. So my job is to create programs, try to be innovative, understand what barriers exist with the people want to say the harder to serve population. It's not that that they're necessarily harder to serve. They just want to be served in a different way. So you have to listen to the people who need to be served in the way, ask them, as Shannon had mentioned earlier, how do
Yes.
you ask people what needs to be addressed? What needs do you have when you're seeking employment? So my job is a wonderful job. I love my job because it allows me that space to listen to both sides and to come up with a win-win situation and solution to engage people in the labor market. We serve underemployed as well, unemployed individuals. And a lot of the funding that we receive is restricted. So this opportunity to engage with United Way to be much more creative has been outstanding for us as we begin to embark on this journey of figuring out what are the needs of the community or the citizens of the community to help them become gainfully employed.
Thank you so much for that. And thank you for all of the work that Employ Milwaukee does and really striving to be and do as a solution-oriented organization. So let's talk a little bit about the work you do specifically to support the Reducing Barriers initiative around education, training, and credentials.
So the work we specifically do in reducing barriers, it really comes along the lines of supports. First, we have to start by having crucial conversations, and then with the individuals who are eligible for our programs. A lot of times it's about how do we have these needs assessments? What are the resources available? What have they utilized? Are they in multiple programs? How do we streamline so that it's not confusing or difficult? A lot of times individuals who participate in our programming have different needs. One of the biggest needs is how do you partake in any educational enhancements when you have economic responsibilities. So one of the ways in which we did is offering paid training. So paying individuals while they are attending any type of educational enhancement opportunity, so that it's not necessarily that you have to choose one or the other. We're so used to the traditional. We go to high school, we go to college. Now we're trying to figure out how do we integrate and. So can I do this and this? So it's training and I can get paid to attend the training so that so that the impact of sacrificing one thing or the other is not as severe. And so for some of our families, that's very crucial, because to say that I'm going to participate in a 8-week or 10-week training, that's 8 or 10 weeks that I have to be without some type of economic viability for my family. So paid training is one of the ways. Driver's license recovery services. We find that, you know, individuals may have had tickets or what have you. So it's how do we offer other services to offset what they need. High school diploma, referrals to literacy services. So we want to make sure. Wisconsin is unique in that they have a 509 HSED program, which is really competency based. It's not necessarily exam based. So there's other creative ways that we're working with other community partners to come up with how do people get to a benchmark in the educational arena so that they can move forward. How do they get that credential so that, because people have skills, a lot of times they just don't know that they have those skills, or the application is a little bit different than a lot of the traditional methodologies. An example would be, you know, another example would be child care assistance. People want to go to training, but I don't have anybody to watch my kids, or I don't have any economic ability to be able to, you know, to be able to pay for somebody to watch my children. So we offer child care assistance. We do really try to have a lot of support. Sometimes it's just the funding. We call them supportive services. You know, sometimes it's getting there. I'm sure we'll talk about transportation later, but is the transportation viable to get to where I need to go? And how can I afford to support that? A bus pass is $72 for a month. It don't seem like a lot, but if you have multiple people in your family and the way they get there is through public transportation, that can be costly. So how do we offset that? So we really try to look at economic impact of how people can engage in enhancing, because the part of it is, you know, reducing barriers to employment. So that piece of it, but it's also, you know, advancement. How do I move you forward? We all know that we need to move. I can get a job, but can I keep a job? So it's getting the job and keeping the job, and that trajectory. How do we support someone throughout that whole process? So that's our goal when we create workforce programs, not just the high level education and training that's needed. Maybe
why, you know, the work that Employ Milwaukee is doing is so important, why it's all good. Over to Dave Steele, who is leading from a perspective of transportation. And so thank you again, Tony, for your time this morning.
Thank you.
And just a quick reminder to all of our attendees on the line, please continue to put your questions and comments in our question and chat box. Good morning, Dave.
Morning, Jasmine. How are you?
I'm well, thank you so much for asking. If you would do us the honors of giving just a very quick overview of the work that you do around transportation.
Absolutely. So the Regional Transit Leadership Council is a relatively new effort. We launched just a few years ago, back in 2016. And we are a coalition of public and private sector leaders from throughout the Milwaukee region that understand that better transit, more multimodal transportation options is good economic development. So the way that we seek to impact this issue is really by being a convener. I really liked earlier that you said about what you talked about, breaking down silos. Right now, we have the central challenge that we're really trying to address in our transportation vein is job sprawl. The fact that as of 2011, the last time we really were able to study this, more than half of the jobs in our region were outside of the scope of public transit. And that's because they've moved further and further out from the core city of Milwaukee. So as a region, as a community, we need to create more housing opportunities in suburban areas. We need to build more jobs and more business activity in the central city of Milwaukee. And we need to move people better and more efficiently around the region. I think we can do all three. There's no reason we can't do all three. Mm-hmm. But our laser-like focus is on that transportation piece. How can we convene the leaders of the different counties, both governmental and business leaders, and think differently about this? Because just because you have a bus route that extends out to a suburban location doesn't mean that it's going to be a viable bus route. And Tony talked earlier about viable transit options. So right now, the way in current state, and I'll just use a random example, not to pick on any one area, but just an example would be on the Brookfield Corners retail development. Huge. You'll see it on 94 when you're going by. Now that's a tremendous development and tons of jobs. They tend to pay a higher wage than similar types of jobs closer to the city of Milwaukee. But to access that job by transit would require about a 90-minute to 2-hour commute from the city each way. Now, put yourself in the position of a person seeking a higher wage job. It's just like any family. They sit down and do the calculus. Is it worth my time to access this higher job? And if the job's paying $13, $14 an hour, you might conclude that it's not. So the end result of this is just a tremendous tremendous challenge for families seeking an entree into the workforce, into higher wage jobs where they can continue to build up the economic ladder. And one thing I would add is that as I've gone all over the region and talked with different business leaders and elected leaders about multimodal transportation, about transit, you would be amazed how many people, from CEOs to C-suite folks to highest ranking public officials, in their younger days were riding the city bus to their first few jobs or to college. Mm-hmm. And it affects all of us. Even if you haven't personally ridden a bus, think about when you go to the grocery store, especially in today's coronavirus reality, when you go to the doctor, the CNAs that are taking care of you at the doctor's office. We all rely on these services to help folks get to those opportunities to then help move our economy and our society forward. So that's what we're all about, is convening and breaking down silos to arrive at tangible solutions to make it work.
Thank you so much for that, and just pointing out how transportation can be a barrier and mm-hmm. To employment, and just a visual of a 90-minute to 2-hour commute each way. And so in a nutshell, and before we transition to our next panelist, mm-hmm. understanding that transportation can be used effectively to reduce the barriers to employment, but why do you see that as being good for business?
Absolutely. So, it's multifaceted. I think it's abundantly clear that we must be a more equitable region in order to be a vibrant and healthy region. And transportation is a tangible way that we can help make that happen for our region. Jasmine, you mentioned New York and Chicago. There are great not only economic but social benefits to multimodal regional transportation. The ability to move around and interact and be around different kinds of people on a daily basis. It literally breaks down barriers. But I would add for, many of our suburban employers and employers in the city of Milwaukee, the workforce shortage is not going away. It is structural. We must become a more attractive region for people to move to, and we must activate existing workforce. The coronavirus, in many ways, might even accelerate the workforce shortages as more people retire out of the workforce. We're an aging state. We have an aging workforce. We need new, folks to, be able to access the labor market. So from an employer perspective, that bus route that connects you to, the city, or we can talk about the van shuttles and some of the things that we envision, suburban circulators, or even ride share solutions to help people connect to jobs. That is your access to a wider labor pool. And that will help you as you grow, as we bounce back out of this crisis. I fervently believe that those regions that bounce back quicker and get more people into the workforce faster and use this crisis in a way, I hate to put it that way, but to do better in the future, will have a built-in advantage that'll last for decades. And, we want our region to be one of those.
Thank you so much, Dave. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Dave Steele, the Executive Director of the Regional Transit Leadership Council. Thank you again for your insights and showing us how more in depth around transportation we need to be. A lot of the things that you said is a perfect segue to our next panelist, Judge Derek Mosley. You talked about activating a workforce and being able to really tap into a population of individuals who need and should have the opportunity to participate in the workforce. So good morning to you, Judge Mosley. If you could please share with us some of the challenges that people are facing when it comes to finding a good job after dealing with the criminal justice system, and why activating these individuals into the workforce is good for business.
Good morning, Jasmine.
Good morning.
So let me start. So we are typically a system which judges people for the rest of their lives based on the worst night of their life. And so this has a historical background. So let's talk legislatively. So legislatively, we have taken individuals who were 17 years old, who we've previously considered to be juveniles, but now have lowered the age of adulthood for the criminal justice system only to 17 years old. So now you have a whole group of individuals who were once juveniles, but now are in the system and now part of everything that the system encompasses. So legislatively, we did that. Legislatively, we've also made things a felony that typically weren't felonies before. The classic example is possession of marijuana for a second time. So if you possess, not distribute, not deliver, not package, just possess marijuana 2 times, you are a felon. You are hung with a felony. And so when you put that into perspective, that you can drink and drive, you can operate while intoxicated, and it doesn't become a felony till you're 4th. But if you possess marijuana twice, it becomes a felony. And so now we hang that on a lot of people with the felonies. We've also made a call to do away with driver's education. I know myself and many people who are probably listening to this webinar got driver's education during school or had the money to pay for it privately. But once we took driver's education out of the school, then it forced one of the biggest school districts, the biggest school district in the state, those kids who many of them qualify for free or reduced lunch, to now have to pay privately, which is $300, for driver's education, which is an impossibility for the vast majority of students at MPS. So now these kids don't have a driver's license. And let's say they find a job, and let's just, not picking on anybody, I'm just going to pick out a place. I'm not going to use Brookfield because we already Dave used Brookfield, but let's just say Sussex. And so they have a job out in Sussex. And so they have to get to that job. And as Dave just pointed out, transportation doesn't make that, public transportation does not make that available to that individual. So what that individual does is they get their hands on a car and they drive out to Sussex. Now, I hear it all the time in court. Defendants tell me every day, Judge, I don't need a license to drive. I just need a car. And so They get that car and they drive out to this job out in Sussex. Now, what we do know is that just getting a license isn't all you need. To title and register a car in Wisconsin, if you live in the city of Milwaukee, is $170. So now this person who doesn't have the money to pay for the title and licensing just drives that car to Sussex with no driver's license. As they drive to Sussex, they pass a squad, a police officer. The police officer looks at the vehicle, sees there's no plate on the vehicle, pulls the vehicle over, that's his job, issues a citation for $100. So the individual gets a $100 ticket for no place on that vehicle, still goes to their job. Now, most of the defendants I see work these jobs, they don't get paid for the first 2 weeks, but they still have to drive to that job every day. And every day they get pulled over because law enforcement then knows they're doing their job, that this person's coming by at this time, that's their shift. I'm just going to wait and stop them, give them a ticket because I know they don't have plates. So now as you wait 2 weeks for your paycheck, you have now accrued $1,000 worth of fines, $100 each day, 5 days a week for 2 weeks on a job that's going to pay you maybe $800, $700, maybe $800. And so now you are in debt to Sussex for $1,000 and you're going to get a paycheck for $800. And so I hear it all the time in court, defendants just exacerbated with this problem. And so they think to themselves, I can't take public education, I can't take public transportation, I can't drive a car because I can't afford to register it at $170. So how about if I try to move out to Sussex, closer to the job? And then I hear all the time, I can't find any place that I can afford out in Sussex. There's no affordable housing for me to go there. And if I do find affordable housing, there's a question on the application that says, have you been convicted of a crime? Or have you been convicted of a felony? I just mentioned when I started that second possession of marijuana, possession, not delivery, not distribution, possession, where 25 states have it legal. But in Wisconsin, your second possession is a felony. So now you have to mark on that box that you are a felon. Well, there goes that apartment, right? Mm-hmm. You can't get a license to drive. You don't have a license because you weren't given one while you were in school. You drive the car because you have a job and you want the job. You're being responsible because you want that job and you want to provide for your family. You can't afford $175 for plates because you aren't working and you're hoping to get that paycheck so you can pay for your plates. But in the course of you working that job, 2 weeks, you work your first 2 weeks are held, you've accrued $1,000 worth of fines. So now you already, your whole check is already gone on those fines, and you still don't have enough money to pay for the registration. And so this is just a cycle that continues over and over and over again. And so we say to people all the time, you know, you go to prison or you go to jail, you're on probation, you're paying your debt to society. But unfortunately, people are constantly paying this debt to society. They never don't pay this debt to society. So I started by saying that we judge people every single day for the rest of their lives for the worst night of their life.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for that and those insights and just the visual picture that you painted of the multiple layers and how the education and the transportation from our previous panels played into all of the things that you shared. This is such an amazing time together, and just to be able to leave some time for questions and an open dialogue. Thank you so much for your time here today, Judge Mosley. And we are going to move to our final panelist, which is Tim Sheehy, President of Metropolitan Milwaukee Association of Commerce. Tim, I know that the MMAC has done so much work around this particular topic with the region of choice. And, you know, with the recent publication of the Milwaukee Urban League State of Black Milwaukee through professor at UWM talked about a lot of the things that you have already been belaboring upon and getting the momentum and the awareness in the community, in the greater region. And specifically, one of the things that stood out to me, that to be a Black person in Milwaukee today is equivalent and somewhat even slightly worse than being in Birmingham in the 60s. So can you talk a little bit of the research and the surveys around the region of choice that you have been leading? And thank you so much as well for your leadership around the region of choice.
Well, let me return the thank you, Jasmine, for your leadership, and really appreciate your insights as we're all working through this. And as you just identified, the racial disparities in Milwaukee are long-term and they're embedded. When we compare Milwaukee to 20 other peer markets, we see that the prosperity on a broad range of measures for the Black and Brown community here ranks at the bottom of those 20 peer regions. And we also have the largest gap in prosperity between the Black and Brown communities here in Milwaukee and the white community. So, you know, that's an issue that we're facing, that and this panel is talking about the multiple ways in which we can impact that gap. The second thing that really stood out for us is when you looking at the educational achievement gap. When you look at the African American community here in Milwaukee over the age of 25, 15% have a bachelor's degree or higher. For the Hispanic Latino community, 14% of the population over the age of 25 has a bachelor's degree or higher. And when you look at the white community, again, over the age of 25, 43% have a bachelor's degree or higher. So we have a huge educational attainment gap. And then finally, when we look at employment, we know that from the work that we're doing on the Region of Choice Pledge, that about 10% of the employment in the companies that are participating is African American, 5% is Hispanic or Latino, and we look at management, it's 4% and 3% respectively. So we have a lot of work to do as a community and as a business community.
And I mean, it goes back to that layering effect and why it's so important. You just brought up education and things of that nature. Obviously, Judge Mosley talked about education and transportation. So just pointing out why those pillars, multifaceted approach collectively is important. You know, leaders must own their responsibility in such an authentic way. And you have been a sheer example of what leadership looks like around this topic through the efforts and the work that you're doing around the Region of Choice. Can you tell us why it's important for other leaders to take a similar ownership as you have?
Yeah, I think the simple answer is for companies that culture really matters. And when we surveyed, 1,100 Black and brown managers across 35 companies, we did 150 participated in focus groups. We had more than 80 human resource leaders participate. And when you see a response that 60% of the 1,100 survey felt that their corporate efforts were focused on compliance and not culture change, when you look at the barriers that Black and brown leaders feel to advancement in their companies, it's why the leadership issue is so critical and why we're working to get companies to come together in this region of choice to share best practices so they can improve the recruitment, the retention, and the advancement of Black and brown talent, which is not only a moral imperative, it's not only a civic imperative, but it's also a practical business imperative and an economic imperative for the community. So just to sum this up real quickly on our end, Jasmine, we have 3 objectives under the Region of Choice. The first is to improve the recruitment, retention, and advancement of Black and brown talent. The second is to increase the educational attainment and career development opportunities for Black and brown students. And the third is to grow the capacity for Black and brown businesses to create wealth through supplier diversity and entrepreneurship.
Well, with leading supplier diversity for Manpower Group, that third pillar is true to my heart and so important because everything is so interrelated and connected. So thank you so much, Tim, and all of our panelists. And while we don't have as much time as we had hoped to take questions from our audience, we do still have a few moments. So at this time, I'd like to turn it back over to Kira, who will guide our next portion and invite all of our panelists to be on camera as she takes some of the questions that we've received from our attendees and points them to you. Kira, thank you so much, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jasmine. And we did get quite a few questions. We will ask a couple of them right now because we know everybody has got to get on with their day, but we will also ask some of these questions to our panelists after the fact so that we can respond to them. You'll see them in print and online and digitally, some of your answers as well. Judge Mosley, one of the questions was, other than the driver's license issues, what are some of the other critical points in time that we might need to be aware of? And what are the things that we can do to intervene to be helpful to the Black and brown young men that you discussed during your part of the conversation?
There we go. So there are there are a number of things other than driver's license. With the limited amount of time, that's what I went into. However, licensing is another issue. So not licensing drivers, but licensing for CNAs or licensing for nurses and licensing for different types of trades. That becomes extremely difficult once you have that felony on your record. And I brought the point up of the marijuana case as a felony because it's really easy to pick up a felony. When I grew up, if a felony was, you got a felony, you did something really bad to get a felony. Now you possess marijuana twice, and that's a felony. And I told you in my example, you need 4 OWIs to get a felony. 4 to get a felony, but 2 possessions of marijuana, you get a felony. You tell me what's worse to public safety: driving drunk 4 times, or someone possessing marijuana, which is legal in 25 states, right? So there are things that happen. The box on applications, whether it's rental applications, whether it's job applications, you mark that box if you've been convicted of a felony, even if it is that possession of marijuana twice. So there's all these barriers that are making it difficult for people.
Thank you very much, Judge Mosley. One of the people out there asked a question about what other ways can the people who are listening give back. We know, donate and donate to United Way and make sure that your workplace is doing the workplace giving to United Way. What are some other ways that the audience can be supportive of the efforts to work with the transportation issues, to help with the licensing issues, to help with the job training? Do any of you guys want to answer that? What are things that the audience can do to help you?
So Kira, real quick, I just want to mention this because I have Tony on the panel as well. So we at the court do a thing called Warrant Withdrawal Wednesdays, and we do it in conjunction with Employ Milwaukee. So our goal is, you walk into the court, you leave the court with your driver's license. We lift the suspensions, we get you the driver's license. If you have any warrants that are preventing you from getting work, we lift those warrants. Then we shuffle you out of the courtroom into a table right next to where we are, where Tony's people are sitting with jobs who are either going to give you training or employment. So you leave with a driver's license, clean warrants, and a job. So if you know any employers are listening who are looking for workers, come on board with our warrant withdrawal, contact Tony, and let's get people employed.
Absolutely, that is fabulous. And that's something that I'll make sure that Mark Cass and our reporters are looking at as well, to make sure that we're promoting those kinds of things and sharing that kind of information. Warrant, say that again, the name of the program again. We'll get, but Judge Mosley's on mute, so we'll get that to you. What other ways? Are there any?
Warrant Withdrawal Wednesday.
Fabulous.
Yeah, Warrant
Dave,
Withdrawal Wednesday.
Thank you. Dave, how about you? Tell me about transportation. What can our audience do to be supportive of you in your efforts to help with transportation?
Appreciate that question a lot. So, our big, bold goal is, as we emerge from the coronavirus crisis, that we can arrive at a toolkit for people to access jobs that right now they have difficulty accessing. And, Judge Mosley talked about, the Sussex example, and that's very real. As we look around the United States, there are innovative practices happening around the country that we can put into play here in Milwaukee, in our Milwaukee area. There's no reason why we can't have a transportation fund working with our partners at Employ Milwaukee and Milwaukee Jobs Work, where individuals can have an Uber or a Lyft pass for a month or so while they're getting established in employment. There's no reason why we can't have circulator shuttles, in our hard to serve, low density suburban areas that work better, more effectively, and provide a faster service that people will want to use than our current alternatives. And then I would say number 2, be engaged and advocate. These are highly localized political decisions that are made. And oftentimes our elected leaders only hear the negative. So if there's a new bus route coming through your neighborhood, if there's a new transportation alternative serving your community. Your alder people, your mayors are certainly going to hear from those that don't want to see that. And I've been in those community meetings, where the things are said, that put the hair on the back of your neck up a little bit. So they hear those things, and that's real, but they need to hear from business leaders, and they need to hear from concerned citizens that understand that these transportation alternatives are there for our customers, they're there for our workers, our employees, they're there for our community members, they're there for us, for all of us, and not to see it as a negative or a detriment or something like that. So be engaged. You'd be amazed how 3 or 4 emails or just a handful of people showing up at a meeting or even just sending an email or phone call can make a difference.
That's awesome. Thank you, Dave. And Tim, how about you? What kinds of things can organizations and employers and our audience do to support the work that the MMAC is doing?
Yeah, it's really simple. We have a region of choice pledge that's on our website. We now have 110 companies employing 145,000 people in the region that have made the commitment to grow their Black and brown talent, both across their organizations and in their management. So it's a great place to engage, to share best practices, to learn, and to help us rise as a region.
Thank you very much. Thank you to everybody. Thank you to all our panelists. Thank you to everybody from United Way. Jasmine, do you want to wrap us up and tell us about if people want to learn more about the initiative?
Absolutely, and thank you all so much again for your time this morning. And Kira, thank you for allowing me to be with you. Just in closing, there's so many ways to get involved. Whether from a United Way perspective, it is you have the opportunity to advocate, to volunteer, and of course, as a member of the board and the campaign cabinet, you have the opportunity to donate as well. The link to learn more information on the United Way's initiative around reducing barriers to employment and advancement is in the chat function. And those are ways that you can become involved, as well as all of the other aspects that have already been shared. So on behalf of the United Way of Greater Milwaukee and Waukesha County, and of course, our partners that are on the line and our gracious host for today, the Milwaukee Business Journal, thank you for your time today, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, everybody. Watch for information in the paper and online as we move forward. Thank you so much for participating in this very important discussion.